Welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk, Michigan State University. Day 3 of preseason camp, Michigan State, the first year of the Jonathan Smith era. Had a chance to speak with offensive coordinator Brian Lindgren, defensive coordinator Joe Rossi. Chris Bogle came out as well, defensive end, and Aidan, Chiles, quarterback. Learned a few things about the team today. We were at practice on Tuesday. Still, they don't have pads on yet. But Joe Rossi, the defensive coordinator, cautioned to us that, when we asked him about certain players and competitions and where players fit, he said, hey, we are still in the evaluation process too. And I don't think that was a cop-out. I think they really are evaluating, especially in this day and age when you have so many new players. Michigan State's got like 40, half the roster are new guys when you count transfers and freshmen. I think it's a solid 42 out of 84 are brand new players. So on defense, there's a lot of new players there too, so they have not put pads on yet. So he's not ready to talk about who's looking great or who's moved into the lead at this position or that. But they're still evaluating right now, Paul, which is part of that's some of the small print in the transfer portal era. Is that first week there's evaluation going on with new players all over the country, I would imagine.
Well, I think part of the evaluation process for those guys isn't just what those guys are doing, but the guys that you were here and through the spring that have learned the defense. If you're talking about defense or offense, if you're talking about offense, those guys are going to be ahead of the people they brought in, post-spring football, and they had to bring in a lot of them because there were a lot of transfers out. So evaluation means you're going to be putting in newcomers that didn't get a chance to learn that defense into situations where maybe they can be successful. And he's probably not going to talk about depth chart stuff because he's going to give all those new guys that he thinks has a chance physically to do some things that need to be effective on the field. He's going to put them in situations to give them a chance, and he's going to keep on doing that and have to keep on doing that as they go through training camp. It's a lot different than what you had maybe 10 years ago with the D'Antonio era, when that first week of practice was really big for newcomers, for those guys to establish themselves, to see if they had kind of the flashed, is what they used to always say, to see if those guys flashed, to see if you could oil them up and get them ready for roles. Now I think you got to take more of a wait and see approach, and you got to keep on giving those guys opportunities. And it is tough when you do have such a roster transition on a consistent basis. But this year more than anything, and it's going to be tough because those guys need to learn something, and you have to kind of streamline the teaching process to get them in positions where they can be successful.
I know. Over at SpartanMag.com, go over there and check it out. By the way, we'd love to have you be a subscriber over there. In the meantime, give us a like here on this channel, this YouTube channel, and subscribe to this channel. We really appreciate that as well. But a couple days ago, I went through kind of projected the depth chart, because they've not released an official depth chart at Michigan State since at least 2019. So I put together something that was a projection, and going through it, it starts to hit home the number of new names. I went through and counted it up. I think there's only 42 returning scholarship players. But I heard Jed Fish, the new head coach at Washington, the other day saying they've only got 38 returning players from a team that played in the national championship game last year. So not every program is going through that, but certainly a number of them are, including Indiana, who's going to be on Michigan State's schedule this year with a new coaching staff. So it's challenging for the readers as well, the Michigan State fans, in terms of getting to know some of these players. That's what we'll try to do at Spartan Mag as we go through preseason camp, getting you more acclimated on some of the new names that are in the program. I thought that it was interesting today, Rossi. I learned a little something about something that's going on in the depth chart. Jalen Thompson, who played last year's defensive end, played rush end mostly in the spring. Lost about 5 or 6 pounds during the offseason, which I thought meant he was getting more acclimated to that stand-up rush end position. But now they've kind of mentioned he's over at strong side defensive end more so than the open side. Even Chris Bogle kind of agreed that that's the case. Surprises me a little bit. I kind of thought that Thompson, I'm not sure that he's natural for that stand-up running and covering. I know there was one play in the spring game where he covered Adamole Faleye across the middle, and it was a challenge for him. It's something that's new, so I don't know if that's permanent. We'll see that as it goes along. But you always hear about coaches wanting to get their best 11 on the field. And a defensive end from the outside looking in, I assumed that was going to be Jalen Thompson and Quindarius Dunnigan. Dunnigan, the defensive end transfer from Middle Tennessee State. He was second team all-conference in the American Conference last year, had a pretty good spring. I kind of thought both those guys would be a little bit ahead of Bogle, but Bogle comes out and he's more of a rush end. They bring in Anthony Jones, a rush end from Indiana, who played with Chad Wilt last year at Indiana. So when you ask Bogle about some of the rush ends, it's Bogle, it's Jones, Gillison coming in from Cincinnati. So I kind of thought I don't mentally, I'm not closing the door on Thompson being over there, but that just kind of scrambled my construct on the defensive front a little bit. Paul, am I talking too much about this? Am I making too much out of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think they put Avery Dunn over there too, and I think he's a guy that's got a little bit of quickness. I think it changes the narrative of what people say about Khris Bogle. You know, I think it bodes well for Khris Bogle that they like him. They brought him out today as well. They brought him out multiple times during spring football. They feel strongly apparently about him at that position, and they also, I think, feel strongly about Jalen Thompson, I think, as a defensive lineman overall, but I think, maybe as a different type of defensive end. And I think the fact that there seems to be a little settling there is interesting, but Rossi kind of downplayed it and basically said we're cross-training guys at different positions. Now, Bogle kind of, I think, let the cat out of the bag more by saying, no, he's in a different meeting room than I am, and that kind of, to me, is significant, because if you were just cross-training a guy, then I would expect him to move back and forth between rush end and defensive end. So I just think maybe it means they're getting a better feel for it. But I think I think Jalen Thompson's got a chance to be a really good.
I do too.
Really good football player. But I think that's a positive with regard to Khris Bogle.
I guess, yeah.
I mean, let's face it. Yeah. I mean, everyone's like, oh, he hasn't done anything. He's not this. He's not that. But he's a guy they keep on trotting out there. So I think you've got to take that as evidence that Khris Bogle's doing what he needs to do. If he's sticking there and they're bringing him out, and guys are moving elsewhere where maybe they can help out more.
Yeah, and I got to say, Bogle, I thought he looked pretty good against the run in 2022 before he was hurt. Last year, it was okay. Spring game, I know it's just a spring showcase and guys maybe trying to protect themselves or whatever, I'm not sure, but I thought he left a little bit to be desired on that day. That's just my editorial comment. Just because I've got high expectations for him. So, but you're right. If they're bringing him out here and he's standing alone at the rush end now, I don't know if that's factual. I don't know if that's what we'll see. But everything seems to lead in that indication. So maybe he's ready to make an impact, the type of impact that he wants to make.
The other thing I would say, just to wrap it up on Bogle, is he's a guy that I think has really benefited from this reset. When he's talking about Joe Rossi in that defense and his role in that defense, he's glowing and he's really happy.
Yeah,
and he said he didn't come out and say that Scotty Hazelton sucked as a defensive coordinator, but he said that by inverse today when he was just raving about Joe Rossi and talking about how Joe Rossi's a real good defensive coordinator and he's legit and he's so excited to play in this defense for this defensive coordinator. He mentioned that Joe Rossi is a great defensive coordinator multiple times. So let's not discount the reset factor. And, it's easy to look at Bogle and see what he's done and say, oh, he hasn't been that great. Maybe he's going to get passed by. But some guys do benefit from a reset. Mm-hmm. We saw that when, D'Antonio took over John L. Smith. Some guys that you've probably given up on were able to kind of, Devin Thomas on the offense, for example, as a wide receiver. He had a breakout season under D'Antonio. But I'm not saying Bogle's going to be all Big Ten or anything like that, but I do think that there's a good chance that he's going to be better and more productive under this defensive coaching staff than he was under the former.
I think he flat out said this scheme is better than last year's scheme.
Well, he said it's better than last year's scheme, but then when talking about specifically the defensive coordinators, he didn't come out and say Scotty Hazelton sucks, but no. he did lavish praise on Joe Rossi, and I think my inference from that was he wasn't very impressed with Scotty Hazelton.
Yeah. And you can go watch that video here on SpartanMag.com. You can check that out and judge for yourselves. But Bogle, we appreciate him coming out and being quotable. We appreciate that in the media, and I know the fans do too. And a lot of people watching are certainly rooting for him. And he's got a level of enthusiasm. You can tell. And he and Chiles on the other side of the ball had a nice interaction as they were changing in the guard at the podium. And there's some togetherness there, and that's good to see.
Well, one of the things that Bogle kept on saying over and over again, and a lot of it's cliches, but he talked about stacking days, and these are guys that are willing to work. And by the amount of times that he mentioned that, stacking days and guys that are willing to work, that kind of means you wonder if some of the experiences he's had in the past year where guys weren't always willing to work.
Accountability, yeah. All right, I got a reader here from Chupan Recycling. Chupan is a new supporting sponsor for us, and we certainly support them. So, and if you watched Spartan Mag Live the other day, I mentioned it there as well. And Chupan and myself, I want to put this out there to you. Did you know that just a few years ago, the state of Michigan ranked first in the nation for deposit container recycling? 90% of all purchased bottles and cans were being redeemed for their deposits at that time. Today, only 73% are being redeemed in the state of Michigan. That means Michiganders are forfeiting over $1 million every year in bottle and can deposits that are not being redeemed. If that's not bad enough, this deficit is also having a negative impact on the environment, with tons of recyclable materials ending up in landfills. Michigan's deposit system creates the cleanest recycling material for the beverage industry to make new cans and new bottles, and it reduces the environmental impact for creating new cans and new bottles. When Michigan's recycling rate drops, it hurts the environment, it hurts the industry, and it hurts all of us. Chupan wants you to know it's up to you to help the environment, help your state, help yourself. Take them back. And they're your lakes, they're your roads, your beaches, and it's your dime. So take them back. It's worth your time, and everyone will benefit. Take them back. A message from Chupan, a great Michigan company dedicated to recycling and dedicated to the Michigan State Spartans. So we appreciate the support from Chupan. We want to support them on that movement as well. Getting back to football real quick, Lindgren came out, the offensive coordinator, and everybody's optimistic this time of year, of course. But you get a sense that it's been mentioned a few times. People are happy to see Luke Newman. It's just one player coming in from the portal on the offensive line, a very good left tackle at Holy Cross last year, plugging him in at offensive guard. They tried him at center a little bit early in the week as well, but guys are mentioning him. I think Bogle even mentioned him. Chiles mentioned him. Lindgren mentioned him. Your thoughts on Lindgren and or Newman, or just what you learned from Lindgren today?
Well, when we talk about player development and who's standing out, I know you and I both do this. You do the mental tally marks of how many times a guy is mentioned. Mm-hmm. And today, Aidan Chiles mentioned Luke Newman twice. Brian Lindgren mentioned Luke Newman, and as you mentioned, Chris Bogle also mentioned Luke Newman.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a pretty athletic guy. Just watching the drills on the O-line the other day, and I think he's got some versatility to him. Obviously, he's shown what he could do at tackle, and he's playing inside now. It's good to have those type of guys, the tackle guard combo type guys, especially when you're an offense that's going to huddle and you're going to try to run the football in a physical manner. I think back to the D'Antonio era when the years that they really ran the ball well. Guys like Fofo and T and stuff like that. Guys that could have been played either tackle. Donovan Clark's another guy like that. You can't have enough of those guys, and that really helps you fill a lot of holes. And when you talk about getting your best five on the field, when you have that versatility, it's a whole lot easier to get your best five on the field when you can plug guys into different spots.
Now, I've mentioned this before. When Michigan State got a commitment from Luke Newman, I went back and watched Holy Cross against Boston College. I looked down their schedule. I'm like, okay, who did they play that's kind of a Big Ten type of team? And I watched them against Boston College. Left tackle against Boston College, and he was excellent. And I wrote this, I think, when I was going position by position at SpartanMag.com, that I'm watching him play left tackle against Boston College, and I'm like, did anybody from Michigan State play offensive tackle in any game all year as well as he played that day? And I don't think so. I don't think anyone did for Michigan State. I know he's coming from Holy Cross and everything, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's the best offensive lineman in the program right now. I mean, he's got to put pads on and learn the scheme and everything, but I don't put that past him. I'll just move on. We've already taled about Newman. I don't want to throw too much out there. But
some of the other guys that were talked about today, as you heard Christian Phillips' name mentioned a couple times. That's a guy that
Bogle mentioned him. Christian Phillips, left guard.
Bogle mentioned him, and Aidan Chiles mentioned him. Those are guys worth knowing. And Aidan Chiles, I know he's a super positive, upbeat guy, but he had some high praise for the O-line. And obviously they have not been in pads yet, but that's those are good things to hear. But you want to hear names like Chris Phillips. You want to hear that out there because that's a young guy that's got a body and some physicality to him, and you'd like to see him get some traction.
Right. Christian Phillips coming in from Georgia. Been in the program for 3 years, came in with a lot of mass, needed to tighten up that baby fat a little bit. Got in the field goal protection unit, I think, last year. This spring, took a lot of reps at first string left guard, competing with Gavin Brocious, a guy from Arizona, been in the program for 3 years. Michigan State recruited both of those guys, signed them out of high school. So these are names, if you're a Michigan State fan, that you may not have heard about in the past. Now they're kind of becoming redshirt sophomores in the program, competing with one another. Brocious was injured last year, so he just got on the field for the first time in the spring. So those two guys, it's a good competition there. We're not going to know until opening day who the person is, but like you said, you keep hearing good things about Dooley. His nickname is Big Dooley. Christian Phillips. And also, the film that you ran here on SpartanMag.com, you can go check it out. I was watching it last night because at practice I was over watching D-line and defensive backs, so I didn't get a chance to watch offensive line other than the film that you had. So I was watching that last night, and I saw Christian Phillips. I'm like, yeah, he's a little quicker. He's one of these guys that every time you see him, he's just a little bit better all the time. And he's got a high ceiling, Paul. He's a guy with a lot of mass to him, got some size. And I asked Lindgren, or maybe I asked Michalczyk, the offensive line coach, back in the spring, because I wasn't sure if Phillips would have the quickness that they want with some of the outside zone schemes that they run. And Michalczyk says, no, he's got the quickness to do it. And that was news to me. You see it now. So some positives there for someone who they could really use some development from.
And then the two other young guys in the class, like after theirs, I'd look at Cole Dellinger as a guy that, just to watch.
He looked good in your film, I thought.
Yeah, he did. I thought, and he does drills. Like when he does drills, he does them with purpose.
Got some pop.
Yeah, he does. He's strong, but he's like, he doesn't go through the motions. And I think when the detail-oriented stuff is huge for offensive linemen because they're positions of incremental development, and if you don't cut corners on drill work and you actually do the drill the way they're supposed to, you get better faster. And I think he's a guy to watch. I think Stanton Ramil, in one clip, he looks and is moving pretty well for a guy that size. Now we don't know, what he's going to look like in a 5-on-5 or in a padded setting, but to me, he's moving better than maybe I expected him to. I was expecting the guy to have a lot of rust, and he looks like he's moving pretty good. So those are two guys that I would say, watch out for.
They're off to a good start.
But you need to have depth guys. You're talking about when you're putting together offensive line or defensive line, it's all about, the 2 deep or the 3 deep, and you want guys that are quality, potentially functional players in that 2 deep because, as Lindgren said today, that like, what's going to make the defense work? It's going to be the offensive line. Can those guys block? Can they play well together? You can have all the skill that you want, and you can have a great quarterback, but if you don't have the functional blocking and the cohesiveness on the offensive line, your offense isn't going to be successful.
Mm-hmm. And that's where they're more behind than any place in the program. For new starters there. Now, of course, one is Miller and one is Newman, but it's a whole new. And then the second stringers, a lot of freshmen and unproven guys that haven't been on the field.
They are also very fortunate to have Michalczyk, who's one of the best offensive line coaches out there, and he gets a lot out of guys. So
we know what he can do and what he can build. So if it doesn't look like that in September, there's no reason to press a panic button. It's going to take some time there on the offensive line, or maybe it'll be ahead of schedule. We don't know, but knowing that he's putting that together. Should create some optimism.
And the other thing is, like we always talk about offensive line this time of year, but the thing that often goes under, like, we talk about it when it doesn't work in third and short, but it's the tight end run blocking that goes with it. And I'm very confident that Michigan State's going to have a much better tight end run blocking operation. So it's not just the offensive line. They're going to have some partners, whether it's tight ends or wide receivers, that kind of help in the run department. A lot of excitement about tight ends. Brendan Parachek is a guy, you think about 5 or 6 young guys that are really standing out. Mm-hmm. He's a guy that showed all kinds of potential when he was on the field last year before he got hurt. He's a guy that everyone's excited to work with. And when you mention that name or you ask a question about Brendan Parachek, that's when eyes start lighting up. Lindgren said something today that he has a chance to be like those NFL tight ends they had at Oregon State, and I think he was being very genuine about that. He expects that to happen, and Parachek is a guy that's big, has physicality to him, and has really good hands, really smooth, a good tight end that fits well into this scheme.
Yeah, Lindgren did light up when I asked him about that, and that was genuine. You could tell. And the reason I asked, and the reason he lit up partly, is because Parachek was not on the field with them in the spring. He was still, rehabbing an injury that he sustained last fall. So they are just getting on the field. These new coaches are just now getting on the field with Parachek. You can sense some excitement there, for sure. Now,
I guess the other big power quote, there's so much today that sometimes it gets glossed over, but one of the things that Lindgren said about when we were talking about wide receiver with him, talking about Nick Marsh playing multiple positions. Now that to me is that's about as complimentary a statement you can have for a true freshman wide receiver, that he's capable of playing multiple positions in an offense. Because usually what happens is, even very good wide receivers, very good freshmen,
meaning the 3 wide receiver positions.
So they get stuck in one position, or they give them enough where they can, play the X or play the Y or the Z. And the fact that he's got enough under his belt and they feel confident enough of his knowledge of not only this offense, but the depths that you have to run, the different route trees and stems, to give him multiple positions. I think that speaks volumes for his capacity to contribute in year one and contribute at more than just maybe a bit role. I think they feel confident enough in him where they think they can get maybe more out of him than a lot of people anticipate.
He's going to have some moments, yeah, for sure. And that goes back to the depth chart that I was putting together, the unofficial projections of the depth chart. Most people know that Montori Foster and now Jerron Glover are probably two of the three starting wide receivers. Went back and looked at the spring game. In the slot, I think it was supposed to be Antonio Gates, but I think he had like a stomach ailment and he went through warm-ups but didn't play. So Isaiah Johnson ended up playing slot with the ones, but he's not with the ones. Right. He might have a good future, but they just kind of changed that as they went along. Marsh was with the twos, but I went back just this week when I was putting that together because the question, in my opinion, is who's going to be the starting slot, because Jerron Glover is mainly, all these guys can play in multiple positions, but Glover's mainly an X, and Foster is mainly like, the old school flanker type of guy. And so who's in the slot? Now all of them can be in the slot in certain formations and different window dressing and everything like that. But I'm like, Nick Marsh it wouldn't surprise anybody if he's the third best receiver on the team. Maybe Gates could make a step. We'll wait and see.
Alante Brown's a guy.
Alante Brown that had a good spring, but then in the spring showcase was with the twos. He wasn't the guy that went out there with Foster and Glover. It was Isaiah Johnson, which is, again, should have been Gates. We were hearing good things about Brown. Brown's certainly in the mix. But it wouldn't surprise anybody if Nick Marsh does emerge as one of the three best receivers on this team. And if Foster's a flanker and Glover's an X, the opening is at slot. Marsh isn't the type of guy you'd think of as a slot, but this is my point. In the spring game, Marsh, even in the spring game, in the spring showcase, he played some slot. He played at least two positions in the spring game, which is something I didn't really realize until about 48 hours ago when I went back and looked at it when I was putting together the depth chart. When I put together the depth chart, I might be wrong, but I at least try to do some research and have some logic behind some of those things. And I put that on the Underground Bunker message board also. I put Marsh in there. I put him at slot. It could be somewhere else. But what Lindgren said today kind of jibes with that a little bit, in that he can play those three positions, which means he can play the slot, which means maybe he's out there in that role with those two guys. Wouldn't surprise me. They're very happy with Marsh. He's got more to go. Chiles likes him for sure. Two young guys. Chiles is leaning on him as his guy for the future and so forth. So Marsh is right on target.
And Foster likes him too. So those are it bodes well for him. Like when you get the oldest wide receiver, the leader of the wide receiver room light up when you talk about a freshman, because that's not always the case. And then you also have the quarterback. And Chiles said that he's still, immature like a freshman. So they're working on that. But I don't sense that as a negative type of comment. There's immature, and then there's immature like jackass immature. And I don't think that he's that guy. I think he's just unseasoned, and they're working on that. But big benefit for Michigan State that he came in the winter as a mid-year enrollee, and it really sounds like he's got a lot of traction, benefited from coming in early, learning the scheme, and he's kind of picked up where he left off.
All right, I might be burying the lead here, or maybe not, but some of the soundbite comments that we had today that'll be getting a lot of traction, soundbites. I don't, it's players saying things, but Aidan Chiles, to his credit, said he said himself, he thinks he's the best quarterback in the Big Ten. Did he say in the country too, or just the Big Ten?
I think
Big Ten.
And wants to be the best quarterback.
Well, I think he said I believe that I am.
But he also said kind of in the way of all quarterbacks believe, or all starting quarterbacks believe.
But do you think that'll be in the soundbite?
Yeah, I mean,
no, that part
that's not going to be in the soundbite. Nor is the Bogle clip where he said that Michigan State's going to have the number one defense in the Big Ten or the country. See, that's the kind of clickbait stuff that drives me crazy. And I know it does you as well, and it doesn't do anyone much good, to be frankly honest with you. I go back to Jackson Kohler as a freshman center at Michigan State. Right before they played Gonzaga, he was talking all kinds of smack after practice, prior to the Gonzaga game, prior to Kentucky, that he was going to show everyone who Jackson Kohler was, how good he was, and how he's going to, on that stage against Gonzaga and then Kentucky, that he was going to, basically arrive. And I didn't run that stuff because I knew he wasn't going to, and I knew he wasn't ready to. It wasn't because I was trying to do him a favor or anything like that, but I just to me that's not what we need to pay attention to, because I think, and I know you believe this, but we try to go a little bit deeper here and try to talk about actual football and maybe not sound bites that are worthless. As a starting quarterback, you want to believe you're the best in the country. It's just similar to players. They say their goal is to win every game on the schedule. Like, there's one team in the country that does that, if any. on a yearly basis. And to play at a high level, you have to have confidence. It doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Right. So I think that those will be the sound bites that make it on TV and so forth. And TV, they don't always have enough time to run the whole quote and so forth, but it makes for interesting viewing. But again, Chiles said every quarterback has to believe in themselves in that regard at some point. But that's a power quote that's going to be out there a lot. And then also Bogle was asked about, the defense and when is the defense of Michigan State going to get back to what it was in the glory days. Now, Bogle wasn't around for the glory days, so he gave the best answer he could come up with, and I give him credit for coming out here and speaking with media. But he said, mark my words, we're going to be a great defense. We're going to get back to being the best team in the best defense in the Big Ten, best defense in the country. And it's great that he thinks that way. It's good that they've got optimism. But in my opinion, like if I'm coming away from this, like with news bites, it's quotable. But there's not a lot of credibility there. I give him credit for being optimistic, but just because he says that doesn't mean that they're going to be that good. Right. And
to me, the story the story with Bogle is not just that, but the fact that he actually believes in his defensive coordinator and believes in his teammates and believes that really believes in his defensive coordinator. Because you can talk about that we're going to be the best defense in the country crap, but kind of the praise that he lavished on his defensive coordinator is kind of. That to me is newsworthy. And then you go back to the Big Ten media days, and and this is reported on where PJ Fleck said that Joe Rossi is the best defensive coordinator he's been around. So that's kind of the story from my perspective. The other ones are sound bites but non-stories, because it really doesn't reflect accurately on the state of the football program or where this thing is headed.
And the only reason I mentioned that is because other people are going to be consuming media, and they're going to be wondering, why didn't we talk about those big quotes that were out there? Because that's what's going to be out there on Twitter and everything. So that's all right. That's just how I feel about it. You guys can feel differently. I feel like I give those guys credit for coming out and speaking with us. I don't think anyone wants to make them look bad or good. They're just reporting what they say. So I put that at the bottom here because I just didn't think it was. It's good that they feel that way.
Yeah, that's like the political candidate that just barely got in the presidential debate stage, claiming that he's going to win the election as a Green Party.
And athletes at this level, I don't know what it's like to be an athlete at that level. You've got to believe in yourself. You got to believe you're the best to get in the ring and do these things. Right. So credit to them. No shade on them at all. We appreciate the comments, but that's just my take on it. Also, Bogle was in the room when Chiles made that statement. So Bogle might have been like feeling the vibe off of that Chiles said this about about being the best quarterback. So he came strong with his belief. Mark my words, we're going to be the best defense in the Big Ten. So it was what it was.
I hope that doesn't lead to him to not be frank and speak his mind in the future. So
because if they have a couple of bad games, people are going to go back to him and say, you said this, what do you say now? So then that's where he gets uncomfortable. And I don't know, we're not here to coach anybody.
I just want him to be open with us when we talk, ask him about depth chart stuff, or ask him about development stuff, and those kind of quotes kind of get in the way of that.
That's all right. All right, anything else, Paul?
Nope.
For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. I've been watching the VCast in East Lansing at the Scandalera Center with the Spartans.
The Tom Izzo football building.
The Tom Izzo football building for SpartanMag.com.